Good morning. It's great to be with you guys, and especially for the privilege of sharing as I was invited to do so this Sunday morning at Calvary Church down in Pinetown, KwaZulu-Natal. Recently, Cheryl and I were down there in KZN for a family gathering, and we were blessed to be able to get up to the Drakensberg, to the Southern Berg, Midlands, Central Berg, and then exit the province through the Northern Berg over Hoek Pass on the R74. And as we were driving, I was amazed to see the herds, the flocks, the green grazing pastures, the good water supply, farm ponds, dams, streams, rivers, from the spring rains that have already come, and noticed the sheep. And many of them look incredibly healthy and in great condition already this early in the growing season, and enjoying safety and security and freedom to be what sheep do best. And this morning I want us to consider Psalm 23. You may know it, you may be able to quote it, but I'm going to read from the CEV, which is the Common English Version, and it goes like this. You, Lord, are my shepherd. I will never be in need. You let me rest in fields of green grass. You lead me to streams of peaceful water, and you refresh my life. You are true to your name, and you lead me along the right paths. I may walk through valleys as dark as death, but I won't be afraid. You are with me, and your shepherd's rod makes me feel safe. You treat me to a feast while my enemies watch. You honor me as your guest, and you fill my cup until it overflows. Your kindness and love will always be with me each day of my life, and I will live forever in your house, Lord. In reading recently, I enjoyed going back to a classic, an oldie but a goodie. It's a book by Philip Keller called The Shepherd Looks at Psalm 23. I'll be using some of his insights as we look at parts of this psalm today. It's interesting, isn't it? And you might stop and think, why are we compared sometimes as humans to sheep? Sheep are always looking out for three things. They need to know they're secure and they are safe, that they are protected, and that they have freedom. Good food and clean water, protection from predators and from dangers, whether it be insect or poisonous plants or thorns, and then a sense of freedom. And those are things that a good shepherd will always be working hard towards to prepare, to provide, and then protect the flock that is under his charge and his care. The writer of the psalm is David, who as a boy was a shepherd to the flocks of his father, so spent many, many days and months and years out in the open, out where he was responsible only for the care of the sheep. And he knew what it was to be awake at night. The Psalms speak of him talking of the starry skies, of singing songs and composing music, but he was also awake to look out for the dangers of predators and animals that would come in to seek to harm the sheep. You might be going through a period in your life where you are saying, I'm needing some safety. I'm needing to see God provide for me. I'm needing to know that He is watching out and He has my back, as it were. He has my best interests at heart. In the Passion Translation, it reads this way in the first verse of Psalm 23. The Lord is my best friend and my shepherd. I always have more than enough. Sheep will eat and graze and search for forage as long as they are hungry. And when sheep are not well cared for, it seems like they are always on their feet. And that's not a good thing if a sheep is continually moving, continually hungry, continually searching for some kind of nutrition. And to be honest, as we were driving through the rural areas and heading to the foothills of the Berg and driving back through the Midlands around to the next destination in the Berg range of mountains, we noticed sheep that were well cared for and well fed and happy and contented, even laying down after grazing, after drinking good, clean, pure water. But we also noticed sheep that were not well cared for, that were thin, that were undernourished. Their wool might have been matted, they may have been covered in mud, looking somewhat unhappy as sheep. And there is the concept here in the times in which David wrote the Psalm 23, as we know it, in which kings of that area of the Middle East were known to be as shepherd kings. They looked out, they were charged with the responsibility, they were required to take care of their sheep. Listening last night to our president here in South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, address the nation after a period when we hadn't heard, and we've been in level 1 of our COVID season, and he announced further reopening of the economy and international travel restrictions being lifted, and once again urging us to be careful and following the protocols for dealing with the COVID pandemic. One senses that he cares for the people of his country as president. And David is talking of a relationship that he has with one who is his good shepherd, God himself. Philip Keller talks of the fact that this psalm reminds him that it isn't just a day's journey that is spoken of here in the psalm. It doesn't happen in a flash. It isn't in a very condensed space and period of time. He sees it as a cycle of, say, taking a whole year of the different seasons that a shepherd is working, preparing, going out ahead, planting crops, providing grains, preparing fields by eliminating dangerous thorns, poisonous plants, making sure that the boundaries of the paddock where the sheep, or the corral, or the camp where the sheep are allowed into is protected, the fences are secure, the boundaries are set. And it's a wonderful reminder that God knows where we are right now, what space we might be in on our spiritual journey as well as our life's journey. We've come through a period of being fearful. We've come through a period of scarcity, wondering, is there going to be enough? Some have gone through times of job loss, of receiving communication that they're no longer required for their services at their place of work or employment. Some are looking for work still. In our own community, at Life Tree Community, we've had some people go through those anxious times and wondering how it's all going to work out. But there's the blessed privilege of us all having a deep confidence and trust in knowing that God, who cares about us, who knows us by name, is going ahead of us. And so as we think on some of these thoughts in the Psalm 23 this morning, I've titled my message, The Good Shepherd and PPEs for you and for me. His personal protection and equipping is there for each one of us as we hear his voice, as we accept his invitation to allow him to lead us and to provide for us and protect us and prepare good things for us. We can have confidence that God does do all things well. It goes on in verse 2 that he offers a resting place for me in his luxurious love. I like that. He leads us along paths that are best for us. A shepherd works hard to know that there has to be rotation in the areas in the fields and the meadows that he takes the sheep out on a given day in a given season for grazing. He needs to know that there are still quiet waters for the sheep to drink from, whether it's a farm pond, whether it's a pool in a stream that's meandering through a valley. Sheep don't like moving, fast-flowing water. They are fearful of those kinds of things, and they will not drink. They'd rather go to a muddy pool that might be infested with dung, it might have insects and bugs in it, and drink bad water if it means having to drink from fast-flowing, swift streams of water. So a shepherd has to be thinking ahead and planning ahead. After the winter or the dry season, when we don't see rains here in South Africa, the fields, the grasses have turned dry and brown. Before the spring rains start, a shepherd will begin to think ahead of where the sheep need to be taken to and how they might best thrive. Keller talks about preparing fields when he served as a shepherd. Philip Keller grew up in East Africa, in Kenya, and as a boy he mixed with the young boys that worked with their father's flocks, looked after the sheep, and he learned a lot by observing and experiencing that environment. So here in Africa we can resonate with that because we have often, when driving through rural areas, seen young boys, young men who are out there assigned to look after the family's flock or herds. And a shepherd carries two things, the rod and the staff. We would know the one as a club or a kiri, a knob kiri. And Keller said he would watch young boys in East Africa actually cut down a branch from a hardwood tree, shape a thick part of that branch into a rounded ball at the end, and use it as a kiri for several things. One, to ward off predators that would come in seeking to harm, to destroy, to kill, to eat sheep. And secondly, sometimes just to guide them, to help them to get back with the flock, to stay in the place of safety and not to wander off. Sheep are prone to do that, and the shepherd knew he needed to be looking out and providing for his sheep. You lead me to streams of peaceful water, and you refresh my life. You are true to your name, and you lead me along the right paths. The shepherd calls out to his sheep. They know the voice of the shepherd. They know if there's somebody else around who is not their shepherd. They quickly recognize that voice is not the good shepherd's. In the New Testament, Jesus says, I am the good shepherd in John chapter 10. My sheep hear my voice and they follow me. But he also talks about other voices. He talks about the thief in John 10. The thief comes in to kill and steal and destroy. That's not a good picture, is it? But we also know that there are predators. Here in Southern Africa, we know about the leopard, and of course, if there are lions that escape from game parks, wildlife reserves, private reserves, they create havoc with neighboring domestic herds and flocks because they will kill and destroy. What is the livelihood of those local people, communities' livelihood, the animals, and how important those are? So God knows that there are dangers that surround us, and he doesn't just take us out of that dangerous environment, but he will lead us along paths that are good. It goes on in that next verse. I may walk through valleys as dark as death. And other versions of that verse say, even when walking through valleys of deep darkness. Now, picture if you've done any hiking or if you've moved into mountainous areas, and there are always areas in the deep gorges that are never quite exposed to the sunlight. I remember hiking in the amphitheater in the northern Drakensberg of KwaZulu-Natal and noticing you could move from hot exposed surfaces and pathways very quickly, move around a corner to where the sun doesn't directly shine, and the whole vegetation changes, doesn't it? You see ferns and you see water flowing down the cliff face, and there's lush vegetation, and it's that much cooler. But when you move from bright sunlight into the shade, it takes a while to adjust, doesn't it? And you always are, when you're hiking, aware of present possible dangers. Not only the pathway, the rocky incline, the climbing up to get to where you want to go, but when you're coming down, it can be slick or slippery. There might be pebbles or gravel in the pathway that cause you to slip and stumble and fall, and you don't want to get off the path when you're going up or coming down. But when you're moving from light into shade, it takes a while for your eyes to adjust. And sheep are naturally fearful and cautious. And a good shepherd knows that sometimes he has to lead the sheep from seemingly open, wide spaces into areas that take them up to high meadows where the sweet grasses are now growing with the spring and summer rains, and good sunshine means there's nutrition as well in that grazing. So here the psalmist David is saying, you lead me even when I pass through the valleys of deep darkness. And it's good to know that he is with us. He's keeping close eye on us, and he's protecting us. I won't be afraid. You are with me, and your shepherd's rod makes me feel safe. So a shepherd will use that rod, not the club, but the rod, which will have a hook at the end, a shepherd's staff as it's known, to help keep the sheep on the narrow path, to help lift sheep that might have fallen and can't get back up. A sheep, when it falls, is not really able to roll over even on a flat surface and get back on its feet. It needs help. And if it isn't found and it isn't helped, it could lead to its own demise or serious injury or even death. So a shepherd is there with his rod or her rod to look after sheep that have fallen. I love the image because there are times in our lives when we look back or even are passing through those valleys of deep darkness, such as we've all experienced globally in the human family as we've gone through this shutdown, this isolation, this period of lockdown. And now as we see the spike again in the pandemic of COVID, and there's concern in countries around the world once more for those very real dangers. Those are valleys of darkness. People have lost jobs, they've lost loved ones, they've lost their health. People worry about having enough by way of food and of finances, and what is the future going to hold. It's a valley of darkness that we might be traveling through corporately, in our own country, in our own communities, with the economy having been battered as it has, which was already a little precarious before COVID came. And so we look to the one who is the Good Shepherd to lead us and to guide us and to protect us. Goes on to say in verse 5, you treat me to a feast while my enemies watch. You honor me as your guest, and you fill my cup until it overflows. It's interesting, isn't it, that we're invited to a feast here, as the psalmist expresses it, and yet it's in the presence of enemies. A shepherd knows that his sheep are always going to be in positions of potential danger. There are three kinds of dangers, maybe more, that a shepherd's looking out to protect his sheep from. The one would be certainly poisonous plants, thorns, and anything that would harm his sheep. That includes insects and bugs. There's a fly, it's called the nasal fly, that gets into the nasal passages of a sheep, lays its eggs, and when the young insect emerges from those eggs, it crawls up as a worm into the higher passages. It may even get into the brain of the sheep. The sheep is irritated by the presence of that fly, the eggs and the worms. A shepherd is looking out to protect the sheep from that. Another danger, of course, is predators. Lions, leopards here in Africa, as we know, those creatures elsewhere in North America, where Philip Keller also served as a shepherd on the northwest coast out in Canada. It might be bears, it might be mountain lions, and none of which are, of course, concerned about the good welfare of the sheep. So those have to be protected from. Also, of course, here in Southern Africa, we have poisonous snakes, so there's another danger. Sheep do well and are contented, ideally speaking, when they can graze in the pre-dawn light as the sun rises and after sunrise in fields where there is moisture. We call it dew. The morning dew is the best form of pure, fresh water, so a sheep gets a double dip. If there's good grazing, there's dew on the vegetation, they can both eat and drink and be satisfied with food and water. And you may have noticed mid-morning as the summer sun rises, as the heat of the day increases, sometimes you'll see sheep in the shade, pastures, under trees, under shrubs, and laying down. That's because they are fed, they're watered, and they're content, and they feel safe. So God here is saying to us in this verse 5, I'm preparing a feast for you, even in the presence of your enemies, even in the presence of very real dangers that may affect you. I am watching over you. I'm protecting, but I'm also providing the very best for you for this time, this season. Summers are good seasons for shepherds. There is good grazing. They won't stay in one spot. They will rotate and take the sheep to different areas so that the vegetation and the food is not overgrazed, because sheep, if left in one pasture, will actually eat all the way down even to the very roots and destroy the vegetation. And overgrazing leads to erosion, and soil erosion means there's no food and no crops growing and no grasses. We know that picture. We've seen it here in the areas where we live in South Africa, and even where else in the world overgrazing takes place. So a shepherd will rotate grazing, will be on the search for good grazing, will prepare safe pastures, will eliminate thorns and bushes that are dangerous and harmful, will eliminate poisonous plants. And Philip Keller talks of a time when he was a shepherd and he got his sons involved, and they went out into a pasture and cleared a whole field of a particular poisonous plant. They actually got down on hands and knees to uproot that plant and get rid of it, because they knew that once that was eliminated from that pasture field, the sheep would be able to move in and be free to graze in safety and have good nutrition. But as the summer rains end, as the autumn winds blow, as the lush green pastures begin to dry up, then there has to be provision for winter quarters and places where the sheep are brought back to, where maybe there is stock feed, there's safety, and there's protection from the cold, the bitter cold. I've seen pictures on Snow Report South Africa on Facebook of some of those communities in the foothills of the Drakensberg, Underberg being one, where the temperature plummets to double-digit minus Celsius and can get down to single-digit Fahrenheit. It's bitter cold. And in those climates, sheep and herds and flocks need to be provided for with warmth and safety and protection. And God does that for us in all seasons of life. I love the way the psalm ends. Your kindness and love will always be with me each day of my life, and I will live forever in your house. So God watches out for us when we're young, when we're developing and growing and finding a career path, when we are looking for a life partner, when we're starting a family, when we're beginning to see success and being able to provide for our family and our households and our extended family, when we move into the years when our health declines and we're dependent more upon those around us, and we are looking for ways to know that still we need safety, provision, and security. God is there for us. And as Cheryl and I move into those years and season of our life, when we're in our mid-60s, we're thinking about that. And we're grateful that God has allowed us to be healthy, to work all these many years, to provide a small measure, to have a safety net or a nest egg of savings that we're now beginning to draw upon. But we also realize how much we need him. And I commend you to the Good Shepherd today for personal protection and equipping. If you hear his voice, would you obey and follow him? If you hear his voice, will you have trust that he knows you personally by name, that he will provide everything that you need to sustain life, but also give you nourishment spiritually speaking, that he will anoint you with his Holy Spirit, who will come alongside, who will speak, and you will recognize his voice and know that surely goodness and mercy will follow you. God bless you today. Thank you for letting me share.